Okay, I'm going to leave that poll up for just a few more minutes as we've got people joining us right here at the top of the hour, but we want to be very respectful of your time. So we're going to go ahead and get started. If you are just joining us, go ahead and take that poll and give us some introduction to you in the chat box. Introduce yourself and let us know where you're joining us from. But we want to thank you all for being here today. We would like to start off our webinar by thanking the Navy Child and Youth Programs for making today's webinar, Demystifying ADHD, possible. We always welcome professionals who work with military-connected children to our parent trainings, and we think you're going to find the information and tips we present useful. But please note that our MSEC parent support webinars have been designed with parents as the target audience. Before we introduce ourselves, we want to share a little bit more about MSEC and its mission. The Military Child Education Coalition, or MSEC, is a nonprofit organization established more than 25 years ago. Our mission is to support all military-connected children by educating, advocating, and collaborating to resolve education challenges associated with the military lifestyle. In 2005, MSEC formalized support and programming for military-connected parents so that they may be empowered, informed, and proactive in supporting their children's educational journey. We strive to deliver informative and interactive webinars that address academic, social, and emotional issues associated with that military family lifestyle. Our vision is that every military-connected child is college, work, and life ready. So we do have a couple of administrative announcements we would like to share with you. At the end of the webinar, we're going to invite you to take our survey about today's presentation. We would appreciate it if you took that 2 to 3 minutes it will require for you to give us your feedback. It's a key method we use to tell our funders what we're doing and let us know where we need to modify things so we can continue offering the very best training opportunities possible for you, those military-connected parents that we serve. That poll is probably still up on your screen, so I'm going to go ahead and end that. I appreciate you guys letting us know what your affiliation is with the military. You can always X out of it in that upper right-hand corner if it's still showing up on your screen. Right now, you should see a chat box on your screen. This is where you can ask us questions and make comments during our webinar. So if you don't have that open, go ahead and find that bar on the bottom and open that up. And then please feel free to utilize this feature in Zoom. As we said, this is going to be a very interactive webinar. Dr. Flake is happy to take your questions. So please chat with us today and let us get to know you a little bit more. In that chat box right now, you should see a PDF file that states downloadable resources. In that, it's going to contain the resources and information relating to today's webinar. Please know if you are joining us on your phone, you're not going to be able to download these resources, but if you private message myself or Michelle, we will see that you receive them later today. Michelle is joining us today. You probably won't see much of her, but she is monitoring our chat box and running our screens. And my name is Sonia Mulek, and I will be your facilitator for today. We do want to let you know that our webinar is being recorded. This is just so you can view that recording later if you want to review the material or if you experience any technical difficulties during the presentation. And then it'll be up on YouTube for you to view in a few weeks and share with friends if you have friends that would find the information valuable. What we want to introduce our special guest to you today. We are very excited to have Dr. Eric Flake joining us today as our subject matter expert. Dr. Flake is a retired Air Force colonel, and he's a developmental behavioral pediatrician and works for the Henry Jackson Foundation. He created the Developmental Behavioral Family Readiness Center for the Department of Defense and founded the only DoD Autism Center at JBLM. Dr. Flake is currently an associate professor at the University of Washington and also at the Uniformed Services University, where he leads a telehealth neurodiversity clinic. We're proud to also say he is a member of our very own MSEC Science Advisory Board. Dr. Flake's passion is celebrating the strengths and resilience of neurodiverse children. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Flake now to help us gain a better understanding of ADHD. Dr. Flake, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Sonia. Thanks, Michelle. A big shout out to MSEC for making this opportunity available for you all. I thank you for coming on. I recognize that days get busy, especially after a long weekend. I hope you all enjoyed a wonderful President's Day and are now getting in the swing of things for a short week ahead of us. I appreciate this opportunity to talk a little bit more about ADHD. I'd also like to thank Dr. George Benson, who helped me with bringing together some of this information and bringing it to light as far as querying families and groups about ADHD and trying to demystify or debunk some of the information that's out there about ADHD. As many of you know, this is abbreviated for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. If you're looking for a really in-depth analysis into ADHD, discussing the neurochemical, neurological pathways and the science using animal models, this probably won't be the presentation for you. But if you're looking for some practical hands-on information in a very brief view of the top 10 myths about ADHD that are very prevalent in our community, this is this presentation that I want to spend time with. And I'd really like your input as well as kind of a back and forth conversation. So if I need to stop what I'm talking about to answer a particular question, I'd like to think there's probably 20 plus of us on at this time, and we could take some time to make sure that we answer the questions that are most relevant and important to you. As was brought up, I've spent probably 25 plus years in this area. It's something that's a passion of mine, and I just rejoice in seeing people who thrive with this type of neurodiversity and understanding it a little bit better. So with that, let's go ahead and bring up our slides. And basically, the way the format will go is there will be one myth, and with each myth, there will be a poll that you'll be able to answer and participate, and then some questions that can be ongoing throughout the presentation in the chat. And as we talk about those in the chat, we'll be able to identify if there's some particular topics. So I'm waiting for slide number 1 to come up because I'm just seeing me.
I can see the slides up, Dr. Flake, so they should be there now, as well as the poll.
Okay.
If the audience can't see them, please let us know in the chat box.
I can see the poll, but for some reason I am not seeing my slides. I'm just seeing myself, which yeah, I'm don't have that high of a vanity level that wanting to just see me.
We've got the audience saying they can see the polls and the slides, so it may be a setting on your computer, Dr. Flake.
Great.
Maybe
I
the
will
view
work
setting,
on the
viewing.
view to the speaker view and go from there and see if that changes. And you can still see the slides as well. Okay, I see your name, Sonia. I'm going to try hide self view. That doesn't work either. Let's try a different view. Show self, show meeting timers.
On view, select side-by-side gallery.
I have gallery, which then just brings up me. Again, I apologize to those that are waiting as you think as we've been far enough into this, we would have that opportunity to see it.
Do you see something that says side-by-side along with the gallery, or standard maybe?
I don't. I have speaker and gallery as far as the view option. Let's try that. I was able to go from webinar to your screen, Michelle, and I
Okay,
think that's what gave us what we wanted. So
good.
I am back online. So thank you all again for allowing me to figure out that piece. Poll number 1, if you guys will draw your attention to the first myth about people with ADHD being lazy or undisciplined. And the question is what does ADHD primarily impair? And there's 4 sections there. And while we're getting a poll response for this, I wanted to bring up where these myths came from. Basically, a survey of hundreds of adults to include those with ADHD, parents of children with ADHD, and medical and other professionals was sent out to query them what they felt like the top 10 most misconceptions or common myths about ADHD were. And these were the responses of the myths in no particular order. Myth number one isn't the one that was the highest response. We just took the 10 most common themes that people had brought up and to help us with debunking this first myth of number one. Is there a poll response that comes up?
There is. Right now, we've got a majority of people selecting B for executive functioning and a few selecting physical coordination and memory.
No, great ones all. Thanks for that response. There we go.
Can
That
you see
looks
it now?
great.
Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic.
So ADHD, I like how this was answered because it does have inner times, I guess kind of like a trick question with all of these impacts, but it's intended to be primarily an executive functioning disorder. And what do I mean by that? Executive functions are mental activities such as planning, organization, impulse control, and sustained attention. And those are some of the core things that our prefrontal cortex helps us with. Memory is important, intelligence is as well, and all of those play into or can worsen some of the executive functioning activities of the brain. But interestingly enough, people with ADHD are commonly very creative. They're great problem solvers, and often helping them with some of these executive functioning challenges can really make a difference in helping them function throughout life with less frustration. So that's the truth, is that of being the executive function, not necessarily an IQ. I don't want people to think that somebody who has ADHD has lower IQ. And often they're highly intelligent. In some ways, they're thinking on multiple streams, and that's where some of that high level of activity, as you would appreciate. There's some very famous and noteworthy people in our communities that have self-identified or been diagnosed historically with ADHD. Let's go on to myth number two. Let's see if we can get into the swing of things here. So ADHD medications are dangerous and addictive. That's the myth. So which of the following is a benefit of ADHD medication when used appropriately? Can it improve impulse control? Does it prevent addictions? Does it help break the bad kid cycle? Or is this something that could be all of the above?
We have some answers coming in. I'll give it just a minute.
Yeah.
Give them a few seconds and then I'll share the results.
Great. And while this is coming up, I'm just going to go forward into this myth. It's interesting how this bad kid cycle comes up quite often. This concept of being labeled or identified and kind of self-perpetuate into these unhealthy patterns of behavior. Definitely ADHD medications primarily are focused on that impulse control. And there's some neurochemical pieces of that we'll talk about later on. And as it helps with that impulse control, the subsequent kind of cascading effect is that it has the potential to prevent addiction and break that bad kid cycle. So again, I would suggest that both of those are right. If you felt like that there needs to be only one right answer, then these are not the polls or quizzes probably set up for you. But thinking about them being safe, breaking some of these negative cycles, and if they're used properly, they do not create addiction. In fact, can prevent addiction. I do think a lot about how demoralizing it can be for somebody with executive functioning challenges like ADHD, going through school day in and day out. I think it's hard enough to go through school or just face life challenges in and of itself without some of the the already uphill climb that has to happen with regards to challenges in impulse control and attention. There's been some pretty good studies that identify that in school, an individual with ADHD often misses about 25 or 30% of what instruction is being provided. And so I think about the cumulative effect in which that can have as time goes on, day after day, year after year, with it out of being treated or the support that is provided, and that negativity and self-destructive behavior or mental activity that happens as a result. I was thinking about my friend from Alabama who identified herself coming on, and there being some very rigid school thoughts where I spent some time in Biloxi, Mississippi, that sometimes some of these behaviors would result in some more very harsh punishments to try to kind of push out that bad boy behavior, where often it was a neurological condition. So I think this is an important myth to highlight. Let's move on to myth number 3. So the concept of this myth is, do all people with ADHD behave the same? And the question is how many distinct types of ADHD are according to DSM-5? So this one gets a little bit more technical if you're not familiar with the Diagnostic Statistic Manual. It's the manual that highlights the various criteria for the diagnoses of mental health or neurodevelopmental conditions. And it highlights the ongoing characters or themes, if you will. Please know that these have been known to change. We're now in our 5th version. And so as we learn more about some of these brain conditions or challenges, they get further defined. But as according to this one, currently the idea is that they are not all the same, and they have very much some distinct subtypes, and you'll see kind of what those are. The 3 distinct subtypes break down into 3, as I mentioned. There's combined, which is the combination of hyperactive or inattentive. So those are those that put 4 or 5. I'm sure you'd be like, well, what about impulsive? Well, they actually combine hyperactivity and impulsivity in the same grouping, and then inattention in a separate group. So those that are inattentive and have hyperactivity and impulsivity, those together who have those type of manifestations at a level that make it difficult to function, have that third or combined. And for the most part, most kids are identified having combined. Girls more than boys have inattentive and are diagnosed later on. And for each one of these subtypes, there are unique individual strengths and challenges that I think are important to keep in mind.
Dr. Flake, we did have a comment from the last one where Miss Yanowski, hopefully I said your name correctly, had commented on the idea of the meds. And she had said her doctor loves to say that biggest side effect for ADHD meds is success. So that's a great testament to that.
I like that. And maybe I'll just take a second on that concept. I don't think that there's been a medicine or a condition that's been more studied or researched in child neurobehavioral or neurodevelopmental. It is one where there's actually a medicine that we can do something about in this neurodevelopmental condition for some of the core components of it. And most medicines are identified as having about an 80 to 90% positive effect rate, and that's about 40 to 50% higher than placebo, which is pretty good. You can still look at it like a glass is half full and say, well, wait a second. What about placebo giving you a 40 or 50% bump or benefit based off of kids who are just taking a medicine that doesn't have medicine with it? But the fact that there's that big of a difference does show that there's an impact. I would also highlight that the part of the success is if there is not success with the medicine, then it is worthwhile to try a second or third different one. And if there's not success with the second or third, then often you're re-looking at determining how complex this ADHD, what are other factors or comorbidities, and we'll talk more about those and where we go from there. I,
Dr. Flake,
yes,
sorry, not to
yeah,
take you up
please.
again, but Anna had made a comment that she was diagnosed super late in life, and she feels like some other women have also been diagnosed later. Is that something that you see? Do women typically get diagnosed later than men? Is that a trend that you've been aware of?
I think we're seeing a kind of this outpouring of awareness, especially in girls, young women, and women who have been masking symptoms or due to certain personality or temperaments would rather hide than bring forward some of those symptoms or those concerns, or they get misinterpreted. And I brought up the bad boy part. There's not necessarily a bad girl, if you will, but often those girls don't get identified and kind of get swept along. And so I am much more pleased to see that there's becoming a voice or awareness or even mothers who are identifying themselves now at an older age are more in tune or attentive to their young daughters or their children, helping them not go through some of the challenges that they went through when they were children. Again, thinking about how education was 20 years ago when they were in school, or even 30 years. To me, every 10 years, there's almost kind of this stepwise approach of awareness that we're having with more and more insight into these conditions. And again, sometimes people are concerned because we don't want the pendulum to go all the one direction and think everyone's going to be overdiagnosed. But there is a real concern to me about being underdiagnosed. And so I do bring that up and I appreciate that. I do want to also highlight our first one coming through the chat. This is a question that I have posed to kind of ponder about. If you could ask one question about ADHD that you would always wonder about, what would it be? And that's something that you can put in the chat box and we can respond to it today. Again, I want this to be interactive, but I can also appreciate that we all learn in different ways. And so there's a multimodal approach intentional during this presentation. Some of it is chat, some of it is question and answer, some of it is straightforward, just myths and truths. And so I'm hoping and welcome any feedback at the end if this multimodal approach is healthy for your learning. And because at the end of the day, I want some of these informations to stick to your already existing knowledge and life experiences with ADHD. So that was my little editorial commercial as we move on to myth number 4.
One more quick question, and then I'll let you move on. We do have one participant who's a little concerned because she says the meds, she sees that her son loses some of his personality when he's on the meds. She kind of feels like it's taking some of that away. What type of advice do you have for her? And then we'll let you move on.
No, this is great. I have no desire to move on until these are done. It is historically been talked about that if a child goes on meds, that it may turn them into, the term is used, zombie, which means to me that they are definitely not on the right medicine if that is happening. I think that there are enough medicines out there where you can find that middle ground where you still have your exuberant, excited, energetic individual and still receive some of the benefits of the executive functioning clarity that the medicines bring. I kind of think about this a little bit as wearing a pair of glasses. There's glasses that you wear that help for seeing up close, or bifocals, or for distance. And sometimes there's you kind of have to pick and choose a little bit. And there is that balance. Often, if no medicine works out in the context for your particular child, because every child is different, then you're focusing more on behavioral techniques and you're celebrating their existing personality. I don't want families to ever think that this intention is that something is wrong and it needs to be cured. This is more, how do we support and how do we recognize that there's ongoing challenges, and can these benefit higher than the risks? And so if the risks outweigh the benefits, then you have to kind of take a look back and say, maybe this isn't for us. And when we talk about the number of children diagnosed with ADHD, it does not mean that every single one of them needs to or should be on a medicine. So thank you for asking these questions. And I saw how beneficial or detrimental are breaks for meds. I've heard points on both sides. Because there are opinions on both sides. I think this is a great one. And I would have to get back to you on some more empirical studies to see if there's long-term outcomes that have shown one being better than another. I think from a clinician standpoint, we like seeing constant consistency. And the way I kind of use a little bit of equivalent to is often it's like watching something through high definition television and then going back to more standard definition. And some of us do better in standard definition. High definition is too much. It's too much information coming in at one time. So as I think about the changes in medicine, some kids can transition to go off on weekends and not have medicines. Some can do well over the summer when there's less tasks asked for them. I think it's an individual answer, and that's probably why there's not a great uniform one overall. I think if I had to defer on one versus the other, I think I'd lean slightly on the consistency side, just because I'm a believer in some of that information that does get missed, not only just at school, but on the weekends, that helps kids in order to develop. I hope I answered that question sufficiently, Anna, but if I didn't, please follow up with me on my email or other conversations. So that's fantastic. I am also looking at the other than medication, what's the number one thing parents can do to implement either at home or as far as different types of therapy? Oh, fantastic question. Oh, Trisha, I think there are so many things, and I wish that there was just one thing that was there. And there's these brain-based exercises that are intended to help strengthen your executive functioning. There's planners or support or organization. I think consistency and support and understanding and praising individuals what their strengths are. I'm a believer in highlighting individual strengths, because I believe as you increase the strength, the weakness also kind of gets better. But if you just focus on the weakness, then I've often seen that the strength sometimes debilitates, and overall developmentally you don't make as much progress. So I know that's a very general answer for a one thing question. I do like some of the apps, some of the exercises. I do also recognize that people like gravitating to things that are easier for them. That's just a natural thing. And so I would rather have children who have ADHD tendencies to learn that they're going to have to work a little bit harder and learn how to put more effort into things and not just go an easy path or a low demand type of pathway. So maybe those are some different concepts. So thank you for bringing up some of these awesome questions. I'm also recognizing I'm about half an hour in and we're at myth number 4. I'm some of these go rather quickly. And so again, please don't hesitate to answer questions or to ask questions. I'm happy to answer them, or other people can answer on the chat some of the questions that come up too, because your lived experiences may be even better. And I am not offended if you have a different opinion than what I'm sharing. Uh, so please bring up other ideas. So ADHD due to poor parenting. I'm sure people feel this way or have heard about it in the past. Huge myth. But what is a significant factor in the development of ADHD? And let you weigh in on that. I will tell you that it is not as a result of parenting, but definitely neurological and genetic factors. And I do agree with the diet and nutrition continues to weigh a piece into it on a daily basis. I think that is a factor for any of us. And it's impressive to me how we uh, get to be a high calorie, low nutrition type of community. And I would definitely say that that has a huge impact in making sure that on a day-to-day basis. But this one is to highlight that this is a brain condition often influenced by genetic components and neurological factors, neurotransmitters that are in our system. Some of this we can see from family trends. We can see people who have had struggles through generations. But definitely parenting can impact and support, but doesn't cause. And also would like to highlight that the most effective parent in the world doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to cure somebody from ADHD. I'm really liking in the last few years that we're moving away from this idea that we need to cure neurodevelopmental conditions versus celebrating neurodiversity and welcome why you want somebody who's neurodiverse or looks at the world a little bit different from a different lens, whether it's ADHD, autism, fetal alcohol, these different neurodevelopmental conditions, that they can bring a perspective or a diversity into any community. And I think that that's very much something that I want to put stomp and accentuate. Um, but that being said, as far as the last one with the parents, I don't want to diminish behavioral management techniques. And if parents are challenged or struggling at all with working through children with ADHD or just children in general, behavior management techniques, there's not a one size fits all, but they definitely have a way of impacting the way that they interact and the children interact reciprocally. I wish that we all kind of had parenting classes at different parts throughout our life course, because that book I couldn't just download into my brain like would be so nice. And it makes me think of the Matrix, but that's not the case. We get to put effort into it and then think about it for our kids. So myth number 5, academics are the only area in a person's life that is impacted by ADHD. This is only something that happens during the school day and doesn't have an impact on their life anywhere else. As you can tell, that's obviously a myth. There's in this question highlighted different opportunities. Having difficulty with impulse control can happen all over the place. ADHD and driving, as you can imagine, is not always a good recipe. And so there's a safety factor. Also, relationships in individuals with ADHD, being aware that sometimes they may miss some of those individual components or reading a room because of inattention. These are things that people struggle with on a daily basis and that go beyond just academics. So organization is a big part of, hey, look at us all being consensus on that one. But organization to me is a big part in helping somebody. I like what Amanda said. It just even when they're asleep, right? how ADHD has an impact on sleep. I don't think that goes unnoticed, and I really didn't put a lot of time into this discussion on that one. But just how much it's their daily life and owning it. Like other long-term constant conditions that are with you. I don't take it that much different than somebody who has asthma or type 1 diabetes that's always affected them. Sometimes helping them learn how to be self-advocates. I'm not proposing that this become a victimism type of idea, that I have ADHD and as such I can't accomplish this, but as a way of conversation, is my ADHD makes this a little bit more harder for me, and as such, this is what I do about it, and looking to recruit supports and being a self-advocate. So that's highlight what I wanted to bring up on that, which is a time for another ponderific question. If you feel on this question, what do you think is the biggest challenge with ADHD that people face in today's society? What are your thoughts on that one? I'm sure I'd like to think that Trish and Amanda can give me a really good, thoughtful answer on that one, if you don't mind me calling you out in the virtual space. Uh, uh, Oh, Kristen brought up a huge one. There was a recent study that talked about medication shortages that came out in pediatrics just this month, that talked about how families had to navigate through so many of these medication shortages. That's a huge one. And calling so many different pharmacies, having to change to different medications. It's a really big black eye, I think, in our medical community that happened. Um, yeah, no, I agree with Summer a lot on how people respond and react to your children, and how do you help them recognize that children are going to act a little different, or kids will be kids a little bit. Um, oh, good, we got some answers back. Yeah, directions and compliance. I'll tell you, Amanda, what I've found is almost it takes 2 or 3 times to give that direction for it to sink in and actually kind of get stuck into the brain. So in the military, we almost give a preparatory command and then a command and then a follow-up on that command. Basically, I'm going to ask you to do this. This is what I'm asking you to do. And now will you repeat back to me what I asked you to do? And I'm sure that people are like, I don't have time for that. But sometimes if it's something you really want them to accomplish, it takes that 3-tier level of talking to get it done. I'm reading what Trisha brought up. I deal with ADHD adult, my slow processing speed. And Amanda, I think I'm glad you bring that up, the processing speed part, because all I'm finding as adults with ADHD that there's variability depending on the time in the day, that sometimes the season, that processing speed changes. And yes, there is some aging that goes with it, but it's not just that. There's other factors that impact that. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think that impacts our children, but they aren't able to articulate it quite in the same way. I want to look at Amanda's just really quick. Why someone wants her to do something, and it's a struggle to get some people to understand that she's not refusing to do it, but her brain craves the knowledge of why. And I agree with that. There's sometimes that having kids learn how to communicate. I'll often talk to children with ADHD and ask them a question, and they'll say, I don't know, or I haven't thought of that. And it's not because they're trying to be belligerent or give me back a snippet answer. I really think that they're giving an honest answer sometimes, most times, that they truly don't know, or they haven't thought about it, or I'm asking a question that is just not in the realm of their thought process on that. So I just and I want to make one more comment about the why. I find that, again, in neurodevelopmental children that have challenges, they often want to anchor, and the brain wants to anchor onto certain kind of pillars or foundations. And so if there is a why answered, that sometimes the why doesn't necessarily make sense to them. And you can often say, well, I know this may not make sense to you now, but this is the why. It helps them feel less anxious in a world that seems to always have kind of a rockier sounding foundation. Um, so great things. Let's see, what are your opinions of supplements along with proper ADHD? Oh, L-carnitine, peer-reviewed studies. So there are some that have been done. L-carnitine more than theanine that I'm aware of. I've had some people ask me about theanine, but it just hasn't carried as much forward. I think there's mixed results on that, just like there's mixed results on lots of other things in neurobehavioral. I also think that for some kids, they're big responders, and others are not so much. It's so multifactorial. It's really difficult. I am not opposed to supplements. I'm not opposed to different uh, holopathic holistic type of interventions, and using just basic vitamins to be able to help support as well as some of these others. They're doing studies, I think, with carnitine to help with PTSD and other neurochemical levels as well, and that has a significant impact. Wow, I am loving this back and forth conversation, and I hope you're liking it just as much. So we're going to move on to 6 myth, which is if someone can just focus on one thing, then that must mean that they don't have ADHD. Or the other term is hyperfocus. Oh, my son can hyperfocus on Legos, so he must not have ADHD. Um, so what causes this variability in focus with individuals with ADHD? So let's spend a little bit of time getting a little deeper into the neurochemicals. The neurotransmitters that are primarily identified in ADHD are dopamine and norepinephrine. Interestingly enough, there's other chemicals in the brain, serotonin, epinephrine, and those have second and third order effects. But the biggest ones that we found is that irregular dopamine and norepinephrine effects have, and their kind of different balances have an impact on how people are able to focus and impulse control, and impact GABA receptors and other types of communication that happens between our neurons. There's other things that impact communication of our brain, which includes fatigue and environmental background noise and just overall over competing distractors. And one thing I will bring up is the distraction piece. It is not uncommon for individuals that are with high dopamine activities. Often those are video games or things that are meant to give you multiple hits at a time, that they are able to focus on that because they're rapid cycling and seeing something multiple times. That is a very sometimes more pleasurable activity than some of the slower, more relationship serotonin building activities, like having a conversation as you're sitting around the dinner table. And when you're working on these different neurotransmitters, one of the things to keep in mind is that uh, often it can be hours later, but children who, whether they're ADHD or children in general, especially ones with kind of very graphic visual learning processes, can almost have a human DVR in their head, and they're replaying episodes or videos that have happened in their past. And whether they're recent or they're happening farther down the line, those can impact how they're paying attention to the conversation you're having with them right then, because they're still distracted from an activity or a video game or something that happened hours before, and they're continuing to have that play on loop. I think that's an important thing to bring up. I also want to highlight that the intent of working with kids that can hyper focus on some points is can induce some of that dopamine effect in that same way. And so that hyper focus allows them to focus and releases those dopamines in that same way that often we try to do with the medicine over something more longer term. I hope I've explained that well. There's some quite a bit of neat science behind that. And then I did see that Summer talked about artificial dyes. My stance on artificial dyes is there are some kids that are very susceptible to it, and there are some kids that it doesn't matter how much dye you put in their food, they can have the most bluest Smurf ice cream in the world and it won't make an impact. It's so individual. And you say, well, why can that be? And I don't have a great answer for you other than the fact that why do some kids immune system trigger if they have cold air or sunlight and they have atopic dermatitis, and other kids can get really exposed to a lot of things in the environment and it doesn't even trigger them. So I just wanted to make sure I didn't leave that one, Summer, and I'm going to read quickly about some of this from Anna and Trish. And so thanks, guys, for putting these things up. Being able to switch between focuses, that transition is tough. Being able to transition can sometimes take a really long time. And Trish, I am sorry that happens to your child, and so it would definitely discourage that. And it is hard. Some of this is trial and error. Um, uh, but I'm just going to kind of move quickly through our last few myths. I don't think they're going to take a lot of time, but this has been a lot of fun for me. This one is ADHD not being real. And I don't think I need to spend a lot of time on this community with that. I think it's been well studied, showing that there are actual neurochemical deficits that happen. Interestingly, in some other countries, this is still a hard thing to accept. Where we're about 7 or 8% of a population being diagnosed and treated with ADHD. In some studies, up to 12% meet the criteria, not that all 12% are being treated, but in some countries, such as France, only 1 to 2% are identified. And there's different things that influence that. So let's see what you came up with on this one. On your survey, all of the above supports the existence. I think there's more of the brain chemical and the documented research. There's just so much behind it. And so if you don't call it ADHD, what do you call it then? And so sometimes we need to end up calling things a certain label so that we can follow their trajectory and help with their path. Myth number 8. Can ADHD coexist with other mental health conditions? Now, this one I think is important because, and what is the percentage? Because complex ADHD is often when there's more than 1 or 2 different conditions. ADHD is merely a description of symptoms, and where we go from there. And basically, I think it's identifying that ADHD can be a contributing factor, but can also have some coexisting, like obsessive compulsive or anxiety. Oppositional defiant is often brought up. I really don't like that determination. I think it's very much moving out of vogue. I discourage that terminology unless it really, really fits. There's some demand avoidance or other things, autism, that's being brought up just that much more as well. So the answer on this one, let's see what people brought, but I'll give you the spoiler alert, is C. More than 50% have that coexisting conditions. So I'm glad no one put 10%, and you're aware that there's more than that. So going on to myth number 9, will medication cure or fix it? It will help some of the core symptoms. Which statement about this is true? But it is not the whole thing. And I often think about ADHD treatment as a pie. And what part of the pie do you want to use? Just the behavioral part, the medication part, the support, the organization part, the the understanding and the acceptance part, I like a multi-disciplinary approach in order to address this. And I think that they're a component of it, but necessarily for some families, that's something they feel very much against. Some cultures are very much against it, and that's okay. We can definitely use other means to try to help, but also as individuals get older, helping them feel empowered to make the decision on whether it can help them. It is interesting as time goes on, and sometimes your brain challenges or functionings get that much harder. There's different times where those medicines really can play a part. If at the college level, at the work level, there's just lots of different components. And the last one, myth number 10, being able to outgrow ADHD. That's an interesting discussion. Do you completely outgrow it, or do you just learn to live with it? Do you outgrow when you don't need medicines anymore? What do I really mean by using the term outgrow? Most individuals will identify that they continue to need and benefit from support of their ADHD symptoms. And about, we'll see what you end up polling, but 66% often report saying that they'll benefit from having medicines throughout their adulthood. So I don't necessarily say that that's outgrowing. This is, again, you can say, Eric, you gave me another trick question that doesn't have a great answer. The best one, though, is that almost 2/3 still benefit from medicines who have been on medicines as a child. So that's kind of an overview of ADHD. Tried to present in a way of myths and wanting to look at ADHD from a maybe a different perspective. One again that I'm hoping kind of sinks in some bullet ideas and concepts as well as our conversation. And although I wish we could just all be around a table having some milk and cookies because I love cookies so much, they're my kryptonite, that and Lindt chocolate balls. But that's more about me than you probably want to know. And just to conclude, that's my intent is to really help you continue to go on this journey as you're looking at addressing ADHD combined with other conditions or just that in of itself. Are there any strategies or resources that you found helpful? Please respond in the chat box. And I'm open to questions, but also recognize that I've taken 50 plus minutes of your time and really respect that. So want to make sure we wrap things up appropriately, but also don't want to have anybody ever go with a question unanswered. So back to Michelle and Sonia. And again, thanks for helping with navigating through this slides and the chat and the ongoing discussions. And a big shout out to all of you. I wish I could highlight every single one of your names. I just seen on the chat: Amanda, Alicia, Summer, Michelle. Thanks so much. Oh, and Kristen, of course.
Dr. Flake, you did have a question. Well, first off, they're wanting to know if you're presenting more in the future, but also can you talk about diagnosis from a primary care doctor versus a neuropsych doctor? That's a big question we're getting.
That's a really big question. Okay, I feel that primary care is very well suited and definitely has advantages of diagnosing ADHD. It is pretty common, meaning 1 in 10 of us can be diagnosed with it and or meet the criteria. And so I don't think that it necessarily requires the extensive evaluation of a neuropsych evaluation. If there is complex ADHD that's not readily responded to with first, second, or third medication, or school supports alone are not able to provide that, then I can see where a neuropsychologist can happen. But just coming out of the starting gate, I think that's giving a lot of information, and sometimes can be way too much information for a child and family to digest. For something is what I'd like to call as straightforward as ADHD. I don't want to over pathologize it. It's just a general part of our diversity. And those that have a genetic component of it too, I want to highlight that early on, I think there was a natural selection of identifying people with ADHD or certain families that had certain community hunter-gatherer roles that required somebody who could stay alert or not over focus on one thing, but be inattentive and have impulsive fight and flight type of behaviors. So again, just something to consider. I don't want anyone to ever feel a negative component that they carry some genetic susceptibility for it. Thanks.
We have two more big questions in the chat box, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up today. And if there's any more, we are sharing Dr. Flake's email, and he's happy to take those. Anna had asked two questions that she had done some research that showed that 60% of people with ADHD or ASD have some type of digestive issues. She wants to know your thoughts on that. And then also, how do you work with a parent who's a little bit concerned about that a diagnosis, an official diagnosis, would hinder their child's future? What do you say to a parent like that? How do you help them to come to the conclusion that their child might need that diagnosis?
That's a really tough one. I think there's a gray area that parents have to decide that depending on level of functioning. If they think it's going to hinder their child, then you're making a risk-benefit decision. But I would say for the most part, if somebody's thinking that their child meets criteria for ADHD and they're struggling, I think there are some well set up parts of supporting ADHD at the graduate level, at the undergraduate level, at the high school level, and helping children learn how to be self-advocates and embracing that neurodiversity and not letting them be victim to it, but letting them have it empower them to move them forward. And I would say to those systems that currently are limiting individuals with ADHD, I think it's up to us to continue to advocate to show why that is not an impairment for those systems. I think about the military, for example. If the military's initially hesitant about letting somebody with ADHD come in, then let's work through the waiver process and highlight just how this individual has functioned in high school or in college or whatever level so that they can, the ADHD isn't a factor of keeping them from meeting whatever their dreams are. I use that as an example of the military. Sometimes people tell me that they're concerned of an ADHD diagnosis keeping their child from joining and being part of a successful part of the military. It may be a little bit more work, but it is still possible. That, as well as ASD, individuals with ASD are in the military, depending again on how they're able to help support the mission and meet that. The other one I wanted to add was the brain gut connection. And I don't want to ever dismiss that. There definitely is recognition as we continue to learn more about it. I would say that parents, again, continue to be ahead of the science on what that is. And sometimes as they discover things that work or don't work, it is ongoingly helpful for us, whether it's a carb protein ratio of a particular diet or certain foods that work or don't work. What is interesting is if a parent finds that that is a critical factor for their child, I could probably put a child right up next to them with very similar symptoms, same diagnosis, and it not be a factor. And so if we're trying to make it all connected, often it doesn't work that way. So I think what's going to be better is when we line up families who have brain gut deficits and group them together and then look at those specific groups or cohorts instead of putting them into the larger pool of all families or children with ADHD. So maybe that is helpful, and those groups often are going to be found online and through social media than through kind of medical channels, because we're just not there yet as far as level of sophistication.
Wonderful. Thank you. And we do want to be very respectful of everyone's time. We typically keep these to about an hour. So I do want to say thank you to all of our participants. I know Dr. Flake was very excited to interact with you guys and answer some of your questions. So we really appreciate your participation today. We also want to say thank you to Dr. Flake. We appreciate the information you've shared with us today, the questions you've answered, and all that you do to support our military-connected students and families. Before we close out, I do have a few resources to share with you, and then we will stay on for a few more minutes if you have a couple more questions. But as we mentioned in the beginning, we do have a survey that we would love for you to take. You can click on the link in the chat box or use the QR code on your screen. It just takes a few minutes, and it just lets us know how we're doing, lets our funders know how we're doing, lets us know where we need to tweak those things. So please go ahead and take that. Once you get in the survey, click on Webinar Survey and then type in the 4-digit webinar number, which is 3325. Be sure to hit submit at the end. And if you don't fill it out now, if you guys are tight on time, you will receive an email invitation to take the survey. So please go ahead and take that 2 to 3 minutes necessary to complete it. We also invite you to check out one of our amazing tools called SchoolQuest. It's an online interactive tool specially designed to support highly mobile military families and students. It has many resources and tips to help students achieve academic success and well-being, and you can sign up today. It's free. If you have any questions, concerns, or educational related issues for your military-connected children, our military student consultants, or MSCs, are the premier source to provide you with one-to-one help or all your questions. Terry and Margaret are both amazing. It's another free resource that we offer to our military-connected families, and they generally try to respond within 48 hours. One-to-one, they work your issue. It's not just a canned response. So please reach out to them at msc@militarychild.org. The Wellbeing Toolkit that we have on our website was developed for parents, school professionals, behavioral and mental health professionals, and community leaders. It's full of resources for all aspects of the military-connected child's well-being. So take a minute if you have it to go and explore this tool on our website, and feel free to share it with others. Several of you have asked about this recording and if it will be available. We want to give you that information now. If you've missed one of our previous webinars, we do these twice a week on different topics. They would be available. So if you want to watch those, or if you want to share the sessions with someone else, this recording will be available on our YouTube channel in about 2 weeks, but you can find all of our previous webinars there as well, and our upcoming webinars on militarychild.org/webinars. So that's in your chat box. We are excited that we have added in Spanish-speaking webinars for our military community. Please join Mariela and Yasmina at the end of each month for these special webinar presentations funded by HEB. As with the rest of our webinars, these will begin at noon Eastern Standard Time. And you can find the next Spanish language webinar, Transitioning from Overseas, along with the link to register for it in your chat box. That will be on Thursday, February 27th. So we encourage you to take a look at those and share that information. Our MSAC 360 summits provide opportunities for cross-sector collaboration, idea sharing, and programming support. For more information, you can use the QR code on the screen or click the link in the chat box. And then an exciting thing that we like to let you guys know about, our MSAC Call for the Arts program is open. We invite military-connected children from all over the world, representing every branch of service, to share interpretations through art of what it means to be a military-connected child. The deadline to submit is April 30th. There are all different categories of art. So please, if you know a military-connected child, please encourage them to submit their artwork to our contest. For more information, you can scan the QR code or click the link in the chat. If you are a professional and you are interested in obtaining a certificate of completion after this live presentation, please complete that online survey and then contact research@militarychild.org, and they will get you taken care of. We want to let you know about our upcoming webinars. We have one tomorrow that may be of interest to our audience. It is Navigating Special Education. And I believe that is with another subject matter expert, Marie McGarry. So please join us for that. And then Thursday, February 20th, for Building Connections During Military Transitions. And you will find those links in your chat box. They start at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. Thank you for joining us, and we want to give a special thanks to the Navy Child and Youth Programs for making today's webinar possible. We are going to stay on for a few minutes with Dr. Flake. If you have any more questions, you can feel free to type those in the chat box. We're going to stop that recording as well, so you can feel free to let us know if you have any additional questions for us. Thanks for all your participation today.